What is the true story of Joan of Arc? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes to life, and every video immerses you in the destinies of those who shaped the world. Today, let's follow in the footsteps of the most famous warrior woman in history, Joan of Arc. The Maid of Orleans, a simple shepherdess turned war leader who made English armies tremble and gave hope to a kneeling kingdom. An icon of courage, she wielded her banner where others raised their swords, leading soldiers and legends behind her. But behind this immortal heroine, a question remains. Who was Joan of Arc, really? A messenger of God, guided by heavenly voices? Or a figure forged by history? A young girl caught up in the storm of a fractured kingdom? But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to not miss anything. Thank you, and have a good journey. Around 1400, Europe, Asia, and Africa were undergoing profound changes. The Black Death, which emerged in the mid-14th century, had decimated millions of inhabitants across several continents. Both cities and countryside continued to bear the scars of this demographic catastrophe as mortality did not stop immediately. Successive epidemic waves still struck here and there. In this climate of desolation, the declining population caused a relative increase in wages and unprecedented social mobility. Lords and urban authorities, faced with a less abundant workforce, had to agree to new forms of negotiation. Peasants, displaced or freed from their former feudal ties, traveled more in search of more fertile lands, while city dwellers migrated to new centers of commerce. At the same time, the Western Christendom was slowly emerging from a major religious crisis, the Western Schism, which began in 1378 and officially ended in 1417. This episode saw several popes competing for legitimacy, establishing their rival courts in Rome, Avignon, or Pisa. The faithful, troubled by these quarrels, developed a certain mistrust of papal authority. The idea of conciliarism, which suggests that an ecumenical council can take precedence over papal authority, was gaining ground. In universities and learned circles, open debates were held on the governance of the Church. Should the sovereign pontiff be obeyed in all circumstances, or should the supremacy of a general synod be recognized? The tensions arising from this religious debate foreshadowed profound changes in the organization of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. During this same period, the Ottoman Empire presented itself as a rising power. Founded by the descendants of Osman the Frithurs at the end of the 13th century, it had gradually extended across Anatolia before crossing the Dardanelles Strait and establishing a presence in Europe. In the first half of the 15th century, it exerted strong military pressure on the Balkans, notably threatening Serbia, Bosnia, and Hungary. The Christian states of Eastern Europe sought to organize common defenses, but coordination remained fragile. The Italian city-states, especially Venice, watched the Turkish expansion with anxiety, as the maritime and trade routes connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean were vital for their prosperity. Further north, Central Europe was shaken by the theological and political questions raised by the Hussite Wars in Bohemia, which saw their first uprising in 1419. Jan Hus, a Czech theologian, had already challenged part of Catholic doctrine and clerical abuses, advocating a return to religious practices closer to the gospel. After his execution for heresy in 1415, his followers rebelled against the established order, demanding a deep reform of the church. These conflicts, marked by violence and sieges, unsettled the emperor and the pope, while fueling the idea across Europe that the ecclesiastical institution might no longer be infallible. Bohemia became a hub of contention with significant political and spiritual repercussions. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean maintains its role as a global commercial crossroads. Genoa, Venice, and Barcelona maintain regular maritime links with the Levant and the Maghreb, facilitating the circulation of spices, precious metals, and luxury fabrics. Italian merchants play a key role in transporting Oriental products, while those from Barcelona actively participate in exporting European goods to Africa and Asia. In the major ports, not only merchandise is exchanged, but also navigation techniques, banking expertise, and naval engineering techniques. The increasingly sophisticated galleys navigate the sea routes linking the West to the declining Byzantine Empire, the cities of the Near East, and the ports of North Africa. Even though piracy and local wars can disrupt these exchanges, the Mediterranean remains a vital bridge between several continents. In West Africa, the legacy of the Mali Empire remains visible at the beginning of the 15th century. This empire, made famous by Emperor Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, established a particularly dynamic trans-Saharan network. Caravans laden with gold, salt, and sometimes slaves cross the Sahara to reach the markets of North Africa, where these precious goods are redirected towards the Mediterranean basin. Muslim scholars also travel these same routes, spreading theological and scientific knowledge. Urban centers like Timbuktu or Djenné become hubs of learning and intellectual exchange, attracting scholars and students from distant countries. Despite possible political fragmentation, the cultural influence of Mali is still felt, and Islam continues to spread there alongside older African beliefs. In Asia, the Ming dynasty, founded in 1368 by Emperor Hongwu, works to stabilize and strengthen the vast Chinese empire. In the early 15th century, Emperor Yongle launches maritime expeditions of an unprecedented scale, led by Admiral Zheng He. These fleets, sometimes gathering several hundred ships, navigate to Southeast Asia, India, and even reach the coasts of Arabia and East Africa. The goals are diplomatic, commercial, and symbolic, to assert Chinese power over the oceans, collect tributes, and establish relationships with far-off rulers. These expeditions demonstrate the remarkable planning and logistical capabilities of China at the time, which was building gigantic junks capable of enduring long maritime voyages. India, meanwhile, is fragmented into several regional sultanates, such as those of Delhi or Jaunpur, while Hindu kingdoms remain in the south. Internal rivalries do not prevent the rise of an economy based on the production of fine textiles, pepper, spices, and other commodities sought after in international markets. Indian merchants are in regular contact with Arab and Persian navigators, who connect the peninsula to the Indian Ocean and the Gulf. These exchange networks gradually transform the peninsula into a commercial hub, where cultural and religious influences intersect, as do technical innovations in the maritime sector. The sultanates sometimes employ administrators and military personnel from lands further west, promoting the circulation of ideas and administrative practices. On the other side of the Atlantic, in Mesoamerica, multiple city-states begin to expand their alliances and influence. In the Valley of Mexico, emerging powers prepare for the formation of a confederation that will come to fruition in 1428. The Triple Alliance, led by the Aztecs of Tenochtitlan, the Acolihuas of Texcoco, and the Tepanecs of Tlacopan. These political entities exert growing control over the surrounding lands, collecting tribute and labor to support vast development projects. In the Andes, several regional states gain power, laying the foundations of what will become the Inca Empire during the 15th century. Pre-Columbian cultures flourished in relative isolation, developing complex agricultural techniques particularly terracing, and constructing monumental religious centers on elevated sites. Across Eurasia, sovereigns and princes must face new military and administrative demands. The wars, frequent amid a context of dynastic rivalries and territorial expansion, now require better equipped and more disciplined armies. The emerging artillery, made from bronze or iron cannons, changes the game on the battlefield. Fortifications, previously designed to withstand traditional ballistic projectiles, are redesigned to hold up against this unprecedented firepower. Lower and thicker bastions emerge, foreshadowing the military architecture of the Renaissance. The advantages of artillery are, however, still limited. The handling of the pieces is complex. Their accuracy remains relative, and their rate of fire is low, but their potential continually interests the monarchs. In addition to the evolution of siege techniques, the tax administration is gradually improved to finance military campaigns. In the kingdoms of Europe, for example, more systematic taxes on harvests, the movement of goods, and even certain urban trades are implemented. The need for regular resources drives sovereigns to rely on literate advisors and officers capable of drafting records, keeping accounts, and negotiating loans with bankers or cities. This quest for revenue encourages the emergence of an embryonic bureaucracy, which gradually concentrates financial prerogatives, once held by the local aristocracy, into the hands of the central power. Similarly, in Asia's large imperial areas like Ming China or the forming Ottoman Empire, equivalent efforts are observed to structure tax collection and rationalize the exercise of power over vast territories. At the beginning of the 15th century, Western Christianity is profoundly marked by the aftermath of the Western Schism, which began in 1378. During this period, several rival popes coexisted, mutually contesting their legitimacy and sowing confusion among the faithful throughout Europe. The Council of Constance, held from 1414 to 1418, aims to end this tier. The bishops and theologians gathered in the imperial city of Constance finally managed to restore papal unity around a single sovereign pontiff. However, although this council officially ends the schism, it does not fully restore the prestige that the Roman papacy once enjoyed. The idea that ecumenical councils could prevail over the authority of a pope persists, reinforced by the traumatic experience of the division. Thus, even after the conclusion of the Council of Constance, the image of the Roman pontiff remains weakened. The questioning of ecclesiastical authority is not limited to the institutional level. From the end of the 14th century, several movements advocating for a profound reform of the church manifest, insisting on evangelical poverty, strict morality of the clergy, and the necessity to control abuses within parishes. Inspired preachers, such as John Wycliffe in England or Jan Hus in Bohemia, attract many followers, resonating with populations weary of papal quarrels and the presumed corruption of some prelates. Calls for a return to the original purity of the Christian message multiply, causing concern in major universities like that of Paris, eager to preserve orthodox doctrine. In France, England, and also in Germany, some of the faithful are sensitive to reform ideas, demanding more transparency and rigor in ecclesiastical organization. Within these political evolutions, chivalry undergoes profound upheavals. Long a symbol of bravery and martial ideal, the chivalric order faces new realities. Artillery begins to appear on battlefields, and rudimentary firearms can pierce the most expensive armor. The major strategic sieges, such as those observed in France or Italy at the beginning of the 15th century, reveal the growing importance of engineers and cannons, redefining the role of heavy cavalry. Likewise, the use of archers and crossbowmen becomes widespread, sometimes inflicting heavy losses on noble fighters reputed to be invincible. During the Hundred Years' War, the French chivalry suffers crushing defeats like at Agincourt in 1415, reinforcing the idea that the way of waging war must be reconsidered. The old codes of honor do not disappear, but must adapt. Despite these changes, courtly culture continued to shine in princely courts. Lavish banquets, tournaments, and jousts remained privileged occasions to display one's worth and generosity. Ideals of chivalric virtues, such as loyalty and courtesy, were cultivated even though the brutality of war was omnipresent. Additionally, popular religiosity unfolded in a spiritual landscape where pilgrimages and confraternities played a unifying role. Sanctuaries, whether dedicated to the Virgin Mary or various saints, attracted crowds seeking divine protection or miraculous intercession. Relics, believed to hold sacred power, were venerated during solemn processions. In cities, guilds and religious confraternities formed around patronal festivals, organizing ceremonies that blended pious fervor and community identity. The institutional church sought to supervise these practices while tolerating a variety of local beliefs. Simultaneously with this courtly and spiritual fervor, the conflict between France and England continued to dominate the political scene in the West. Engaged since the mid-14th century, the Hundred Years' War challenged the sovereignty of the French monarchy and the balance of noble powers. The English Plantagenets, claiming the crown of France through dynastic alliances, inflicted several resounding defeats on the French royal armies. The chevauchée and plundering became feared war strategies as they allowed aggressors to ruin enemy lands and demoralize local populations. Entire regions, especially in the north and west of France, were ravaged, and the number of displaced families continued to grow. The increase in taxes to finance the war effort also created internal tensions, as peasants and craftsmen struggled to bear an ever heavier fiscal burden. The human consequences of this prolonged conflict manifested as new forms of suffering and insecurity. Massive, sometimes forced displacements created pockets of misery on the outskirts of fortified cities where refugees hoped to find protection. Bandits, often former soldiers without pay, roamed the countryside and preyed on travelers and merchandise convoys. Centers of revolt also multiplied, fueled by peasant distress and fiscal pressure. In some regions, sporadic uprisings occurred, aiming to oust tax collectors deemed abusive or to achieve better living conditions. On the social front, many lords saw their incomes dwindle due to the devastation of their lands, while the monarchy had to confront cross-cutting demands. It needed to appease the nobility, which feared losing its privileges, and respond to the grievances of a population seeking security. In this climate, royal authorities often needed to reaffirm their legitimacy through symbolic acts of power. Fairs, grand gatherings around cathedrals, and the promulgation of new ordinances aimed to demonstrate that order remained in effect. Monarchs also tried to rely on the church to strengthen their image by having themselves crowned or participating in public liturgies. Yet, the memory of the Great Schism still lingered. Trust in the ecclesiastical hierarchy had not been fully restored, and reform advocates continued to demand more probity. In both the Kingdom of France and England, the necessity of funding endless military campaigns made dialogue between the power and the subjects particularly complex. Each victory or defeat on the battlefield directly affected internal stability, while the royal figure oscillated between sacred authority and administrative responsibility. Joan of Arc, a major figure in the history of France, was born around 1412 in a rural environment marked by political and military instability. Her birthplace, Domrémy, is located in the Barrois, near Champagne, at the border of several feudal entities. This region, called a march, regularly suffered from chevauchés, operations conducted by soldiers who would traverse the territory, pillage, and frighten the inhabitants. For an international audience, it is important to know that the Barrois was under the authority of the Duke of Bar, while being close to Champagne, which was part of the Kingdom of France. The area was exposed to fiscal and military pressures, generating chronic insecurity. The population, mostly composed of peasants, organized their survival around farming the fields, while enduring seigneurial rivalries that weakened local society. Joan's family was that of plowmen, wealthy peasants with land and some resources. They were distinguished from simple agricultural laborers by their ability to own a team, sometimes several oxen or horses, and to cultivate their own fields. This relative prosperity offered a special status within the community, involving economic and social responsibilities. Joan grew up in a household where daily labor was primarily dictated by the seasons, under the supervision of her father, Jacques d'Arc, and her mother, Isabelle Romée. Late testimonies describe a family environment marked by piety, solidarity, and a strong sense of honor. Religious celebrations at the local parish were crucial moments of cohesion for this household, as well as for other inhabitants of Domrémy. Liturgical festivals, Sunday masses, and processions provided opportunities to gather, pray, share news, and strengthen social bonds. In this border village, formal education remained rare for girls, and Joan was no exception. In the early 15th century, learning to read and write was often reserved for boys intended to become clerks, notaries. Girls, on the other hand, focused on domestic skills related to household maintenance and agricultural work. However, it is known that the young Joan, like many of her peers, received basic religious instruction, taught by the parish priest, or lay catechists. This education covered essential prayers, the commandments of the Church, the creed, and sacred rites and gestures. In Europe at that time, popular piety played a predominant role in daily life, and religious practice was experienced both in the village community and in the intimacy of individual prayer. For Joan, who grew up in this context, faith constituted a solid landmark and a moral framework that she seemed to assimilate very early, though she didn't have access to an extensive book culture. Besides the religious aspect, Domrémy presented a rich folklore where ancient beliefs and Christian traditions mingled. The fairy tree of Bourlemont illustrates this fusion well. Sometimes described as a beach, it stood not far from the local castle and served as a gathering point for the village population. In the Middle Ages, such trees were often associated with legends or ritual practices. Some people would come to hang ribbons or leave offerings, hoping to gain protection or blessing. The clergy tolerated and sometimes even encouraged these rites as long as they did not directly oppose the dogmas. However, many ecclesiastical authorities viewed the survival of pagan or superstitious practices with suspicion. The history of Domrémy reminds us of the complex and syncretic nature of medieval spirituality, combining the cult of saints, devotion to the Virgin Mary, and older popular customs. The processions in the village, punctuated by the sound of bells and the veneration of relics, formed a festive calendar where the community gathered and shared a sense of collective belonging. Although these moments of rejoicing, the specter of war remains. Since the end of the 14th century, France has been engaged in the 100 Years' War, which opposes the Valois dynasty to the Plantagenet one reigning over England. Tales of plundering, rumors of skirmishes, and the random presence of soldiers or highwaymen maintain an atmosphere of insecurity throughout the north and east of the kingdom. Domrémy, due to its frontier position, is not spared. Families fear the arrival of unpaid troops, ready to help themselves to peasant goods. Harvests can be forcibly requisitioned, livestock stolen, houses burned. To protect themselves, villagers develop networks of solidarity, cover for each other, and sometimes organize watches. It is said that during Jeanne's childhood, local feudal tensions between the supporters of the King of France and those of the Duke of Burgundy further add to the general confusion. The inhabitants then have to manage, as best they can, forced conscriptions, seigneurial taxes, and the unexpected passage of armed men. Jeanne, according to testimonies gathered much later, was considered by those around her as a pious and generous young girl. She was described as working tirelessly in the fields and at home, whether it was sewing, spinning, or carrying out agricultural tasks. Some said she fasted regularly and willingly dedicated part of her meager resources to helping those less fortunate. Her modest attire was also noted. Unconcerned with coquetry, she represented the model of a country girl submissive to the religious and social order of the time. This daily piety was expressed through concrete acts, such as caring for the sick or offering small gifts during certain festivities. In medieval villages, this type of attitude, valuing charity, forged a reputation for virtue and attracted the neighbor's sympathy. For today's audience, it is essential to understand that in the 15th century society, these moral qualities could greatly enhance the esteem given to a person without noble title or considerable fortune. Thus, Jeanne's family benefited from a certain respect, reinforced by the virtuous reputation of their daughter. Around 1425, while France is scarred by years of conflicts and political crises, Jeanne, still a teenager, begins to speak of inexplicable phenomena. In her village of Domrémy, she regularly attends the parish church, takes part in processions, and is immersed in the surrounding religious fervor. However, this locally common piety suddenly takes on a more surprising dimension when she claims to hear voices whispering advice, encouragements, and, above all, entrusting her with an extraordinary mission. The rural society, deeply attached to spiritual beliefs, welcomes these initial confidences with curiosity and caution. According to Jeanne, these voices take the form of saints venerated by the Catholic Church. She explicitly mentions St. Catherine of Alexandria, St. Margaret of Antioch, and the Archangel Michael, all recognized for their protective role, courage, or dedication to faith. These figures possess, in the medieval collective consciousness, a considerable aura, and invoking them confers a certain spiritual legitimacy to anyone claiming their influence. For Jeanne, this identification goes far beyond a simple pious vision. She insists that these celestial entities speaking directly to her call to fight the English, liberate besieged Orléans, and restore the monarchy by having Dauphin Charles crowned at Reims. The emergence of these supernatural messages creates a profound dilemma in the young girl's mind. She lives in a society where religious authority is paramount, but also very controlled by a solid ecclesiastical hierarchy. Publicly declaring that one hears divine voices can lead to suspicion or even accusations of heresy. Moreover, mentioning the idea that a young peasant girl participates in military affairs seems to go against the social norms of the time, where warfare is considered a male domain. Jeanne is therefore forced to measure her revelations, to confide discerningly to trusted close ones. While feeling the urgency of the divine injunctions, she fears her words might be turned against her. The injunctions Jeanne receives are not limited to prayer. They instruct her to take part in military matters in a way that no one could have imagined for a teenage girl from the countryside. In her eyes, France is in peril, Orleans is threatened, and the Dauphin Charles is deprived of his coronation. The voices insist then on the idea that there is no time to lose. This urgency is reflected in her words when she later explains that she could no longer defer the decision to leave. However, the conflict settles within her, as she knows that such a step could be seen as an affront to traditional structures, and she fears the reaction of local and ecclesiastical authorities. As the months go by, she feels more strongly the need to take the decisive step. The voices, she insists, press her to set out to meet authoritative figures capable of helping her reach the Dauphin. Jeanne is also aware of the prospect of participating in the lifting of the siege of Orléans, a strategic stronghold for the survival of the French party. In a context where the war drags on and the people suffer from deprivations, every stronghold is of crucial importance. Orléans symbolizes resistance against the invader, and losing this city would be a fatal blow to the Dauphin's fragile authority. The voices ask Jeanne to be the arm of this announced reconquest despite her young age. This injunction to leave her natal home to turn to military affairs converges with the image of Archangel Michael, whom she often evokes. In Christian tradition, Michael is the leader of the heavenly armies, the victor over evil in the apocalypse. The fact that Jeanne claims to hear his words gives her mission both a martial and sacred character. In a political and military environment dominated by lords sometimes in conflict with each other, and where the papacy has just emerged from a devastating schism, the mention of the archangel acts as a spiritual standard likely to galvanize those who learn of her intentions. Furthermore, St. Catherine and St. Margaret are also figures of Christian courage. The invocation of these saints reinforces the dimension of purity and devotion surrounding Jeanne's narrative. When Joan of Arc, then still unknown outside her native village, decides to go to Vaucouleurs during the year 1428, she has only one goal in mind: to convince the local authorities to let her pursue what she considers her divine mission, namely, to rescue the Kingdom of France, then threatened by the English. Vaucouleurs is a key stronghold located in the east of the kingdom, near the borders of Barrois and Champagne, where Captain Robert de Baudricourt represents royal authority in a territory in perpetual military tension. This lord, who commands the garrison, receives alarming news daily about the English enemy's military progress and internal political instability. Yet, when Jeanne presents herself to him, the first reactions remain hostile. Robert de Baudricourt, a pragmatic man accustomed to the realities of conflict, receives many complaints from peasants and ordinary travelers seeking help or protection. Seeing a teenage girl in simple attire arriving, proclaiming extraordinary military intentions, arouses his skepticism. Witnesses of this first meeting recount that Jeanne was ridiculed, both by the soldiers of the garrison and by the captain himself. Not only does she face doubts about her mental health, but she also encounters the crucial issue of legitimacy. Who is she to take up arms, decide the fate of the French army, and even claim to be guided by voices from heaven? The atmosphere at Vaucouleurs is therefore hardly favorable to her initial requests. Nevertheless, Jeanne is not discouraged. Upon her return to the vicinity of Vaucouleurs, she seeks support from influential local figures, notably her uncle Durand Laxart, sometimes mentioned under other orthographic forms in period texts. This man, intrigued by the young girl's fervor and aware of the climate of distress prevailing among the population, agrees to help her by interceding on her behalf. He helps her obtain new meetings with local personalities willing to listen to her speech. In these exchanges, Jeanne insists on the worsening situation of the Kingdom of France, the urgency of a victorious military intervention, and her own conviction of being mandated by God. Gradually, some curious individuals begin to take her more seriously. An event is set to play in Jeanne's favor, a military rumor that, according to some chroniclers, proves accurate and supposedly confirms the accuracy of her revelations. Historians often disagree on the precise nature of this information. It could be a new French defeat in a neighboring province, or a movement of English troops that nullifies hopes for a quick truce. In any case, in the eyes of some observers, Jeanne seems endowed with an extraordinary form of intuition. Robert de Baudricourt, a man who until then considered her an unreliable fanatic, begins to yield to the pressure of this pseudo-miracle. For in the minds of many, this coincidence confirms the prophetic narrative of the young messenger. When Baudricourt decides to support Jeanne's endeavor, it is primarily for strategic interest. In the event of success, he could strengthen his position with the royal party, as the country is engulfed in the 100 Years' War, and doubt heavily burdens the Dauphin Charles. At the same time, Baudricourt starts to understand that the young girl's unwavering faith could restore some hope to the population, exhausted after so many years of conflict. He thus arranges a more formal meeting, during which Jeanne demands what was unimaginable to grant a simple peasant girl male attire to travel discreetly and protect herself, as well as a handful of armed companions to lead her to the Dauphin's court, currently established in Chinon. The wearing of male clothing raises a vast moral debate within the population itself. At that time, wearing trousers or a doublet was subject to a strict dress code reserved for men. Civil and religious customs deemed it strange, even offensive, for a woman to present herself in such a manner. Yet, Jeanne puts forward several justifications: the necessity of traveling safely in regions infested with armed bands, the need to distinguish herself as the future leader of a company of soldiers, and above all, obedience to what she believes to be the divine will. In the minds of some supporters, this change in attire already symbolizes the unique role she is about to play. She is no longer a simple peasant girl, but indeed the designated instrument to save France from English domination. Aside from this clothing issue, Jeanne equips herself with a few symbols that will enhance her emerging aura. She acquires a ring, likely given by a close one, to which she attaches sentimental and spiritual value. Furthermore, she begins to conceive the idea of carrying a personal standard. This flag, whose colors and patterns will vary according to testimonies, should display sacred images or inscriptions, elevating her action to the rank of a divine mission. This is a powerful gesture in medieval culture. Wielding a standard goes beyond the purely military domain to serve as an identification and rallying point. Thus, the young peasant girl from Domrémy gradually transforms into a quasi-chivalric figure, adopting the outward signs of a leader and imprinting a form of mystical legitimacy in people's minds. Around February 1429, the decision to leave for Chinon becomes irrevocable. For this journey, Jeanne obtains from the captain of Vaucouleurs a small escort troop, composed of a few men-at-arms and servants. Among this group are notably Jean de Metz and Bertrand de Poulengy, two figures who, according to several sources, were touched by the young woman's determination and decided to accompany her despite the risks. Traveling through this war-torn France was not an easy feat. Between enemy raids, unpaid mercenary bands, and ravaged areas plagued by famine, the route promised to be dangerous. That is why oaths are exchanged to guarantee the confidentiality of the mission and the cohesion of the small detachment. As for the routes they take, the accounts sometimes remain contradictory. The team must avoid areas controlled by the English and their Burgundian allies while quickly crossing loyalist regions. The option to travel at night is often mentioned to avoid detection by enemy garrisons. In their luggage, they carry the few provisions they could gather, some light weapons, and above all, Jeanne's fierce determination to complete her mission. These escort men, initially skeptical, later testify to their protégé's constant piety, repeated prayers, and persuasive strength. For them, sharing her journey slowly becomes an honor, as the context calls for a moral renewal, and the prospect, however slim, of victory. Upon leaving Vaucouleurs, Jeanne and her companions leave behind a place transformed into a legendary starting point. For those who witnessed it, this stage marks the beginning of an unexpected epic, where faith and determination seem to already challenge the established order. At the end of this journey, Jeanne and her small troop finally reach the outskirts of Chinon, probably in March 1429. The city's walls rise above the Vienne, housing the court of the Dauphin Charles. He remains surrounded by advisors, divided on how to deal with the English. As Jeanne approaches, the rumor of her arrival spreads. Some courtiers find it inconceivable that she claims a divine mission. Others, tired of the climate of defeat, hope to see in her a sign of renewal. This excitement reveals the deep political divisions plaguing the French camp, partially withdrawn to this fortress on the Loire. When Jeanne is introduced to the Château de Chinon, distrust reigns. Some fear she may be an agent manipulated by the enemy, and others dread a ruse. The Dauphin Charles, advised by those close to him, who oscillate between skepticism and hope, decides to subject her to a test. He hides among the crowd of courtiers, letting another man occupy the place of honor. According to the accounts, Jeanne does not hesitate, heading toward Charles and calling him Gentle Dauphin. This episode, dramatized by later chronicles, becomes a foundational moment for Jeanne's reputation. Recognizing him despite the ruse, she shows, in the eyes of the witnesses, that she obtains supernatural assistance and asserts the legitimacy of the prince she intends to serve. After this recognition, Jeanne exchanges a few words with Charles in a more private space, away from indiscreet echoes. According to some chroniclers, she shares her intention to lift the siege of Orleans, a city crucial for the kingdom's balance, and to lead him to Reims Cathedral for the coronation. The firmness of her conviction surprises the barons present, but also provokes some enthusiasm. For an international audience discovering this story, it is important to recall that Orleans is then the cornerstone of the French line of defense. If it fell into English hands, the Dauphin would lose the heart of his territories. The idea of making their way to Reims, the traditional city of coronation, appears as a strong gesture. Despite the resounding effect of these initial declarations, doubts persist at the court. There is fear that this young woman from an ordinary background is merely a visionary or even a heretical creature. Some advisors insist on the need to subject Jeanne to a theological examination to ensure she does not contravene church dogma. The debates ignite. Should this momentum be welcomed with gratitude, or should the risks of imposture be feared? Charles's reputation is already fragile, and a misjudgment could cost him the little support he still has. In this context, the meeting with Jeanne acts as a catalyst. Either she will boost the troops' morale, or she will precipitate a fiasco. The Dauphin's opinion remains wavering, torn between fear and hope. Faced with these questions, Jeanne shows firmness and respect towards the ecclesiastical authorities. She presents herself as a servant of God, sent to obey the divine will. Her language remains humble, punctuated with pious references, which contrasts with the typical image of war leaders. She does not claim any prestigious title or material advantage for herself. The only thing that matters to her is the mission to liberate the kingdom. This stance, though surprising to some courtiers accustomed to intrigues, earns her a certain creditability. It is then suggested that Jeanne be sent to Poitiers, a city housing a university, so that learned clerics can evaluate the righteousness of her words and decide on the legitimacy of her mission. During these initial exchanges in Chinon, Jeanne's behavior also stands out for her determination to execute what she believes to be the divine will. Faced with the hesitation of Charles and part of his entourage, she reiterates her offer to rush to the aid of Orléans without delay. Her confidence unsettles the barons, as the custom of the time required long negotiations, promises of support, and elaborate preparations before engaging in a military operation. For Jeanne, delaying further would endanger the besieged city and break the popular momentum sparked by her arrival. This urgency, combined with her repeated expression of faith, places the Dauphin in front of a choice: prolong the doubt or seize the opportunity of a collective hope based on this miraculous intervention. In early spring 1429, as the military situation remains critical for the supporters of the Dauphin Charles within the context of the 100 Years' War, Jeanne is taken to Poitiers. This city, located in the region of Poitou, is then anticipated to host an ecclesiastical commission tasked with examining the words and conduct of the young woman. The political and religious leaders want to ensure they can trust her without further jeopardizing the royal cause. Tensions between advocates of moral reform of the church and supporters of papal authority, as well as the fear of heresy, prompt caution within the Dauphin Charles's court. He does not intend to make Jeanne the banner-bearer of his armies without first receiving the opinion of experts capable of detecting a possible imposture or a demonic influence. This examination is not rushed. Ecclesiastics, theologians trained in universities, and lay advisors are mobilized to question Jeanne, gather her statements, and determine whether her voices and visions are a miracle or an error. The city of Poitiers, geographically close to the zones controlled by the Dauphin, is deemed suitable to conduct such an investigation, while being safe enough to avoid threats of enemy incursion. These ecclesiastics and theologians, recruited from the most competent available at the court, form an impressive and diverse delegation with varied motivations. Some are immediately curious, intrigued by this peasant girl who claims to hear the Archangel Michael or saints, such as Catherine and Margaret. Others, more skeptical, are wary of any claims to divine predestination, as several heretical or pseudo-mystical movements have already appeared across Europe during the 14th and early 15th centuries. The shock regimes undergone by the Christian world, whether it be the Black Death, which decimated a large part of the population, or the Western Schism, which divided the church between competing popes, have fueled the rise of charismatic preachers and self-proclaimed prophets. Authorities, wary from these past cases, seek solid guarantees before acknowledging any supernatural intervention. During several interrogation sessions, Jeanne is confronted with specific questions about her voices, the nature of her revelations, and her religious practice. The ecclesiastics primarily wish to evaluate her knowledge of the Catholic faith and verify that she is not spreading any suspicious doctrines. She is asked to recount the first time she heard voices, to specify in what forms they appeared to her, and whether sacred figures visibly appeared to her. The men of the church also test her understanding of the sacraments, the solidity of her prayers, and her willingness to respect the ecclesiastical hierarchy. The goal is to determine if she acknowledges the authority of the militant church, meaning the institution established on earth, or if she claims to obey only God, bypassing human judgment. Any trace of disobedience toward the bishops or theologians of the commission could be interpreted as a direct challenge to the official church, which would be very serious. In parallel, the commission is interested in Jean's morality. Rumors of the time circulate easily. It is said that some women attract false prophets to overthrow the established order or make pacts with the devil to gain supernatural powers. The judges want to guard against any scandal. Before even validating the idea that Jean might lead troops, there is a concrete way to advance, or not an accusation of witchcraft. It's the verification of her virginity. In the mindset of that time, a woman with malevolent powers or a corrupt nature might have had carnal commerce with a demon or evil spirit. By examining Jean to verify that she is a virgin, the commission rules out the hypothesis of a physical alliance with the devil, which, in medieval mentalities, constitutes additional proof of her possible sincerity. The medical examination, as envisioned then, is not merely a gesture of unhealthy curiosity. It follows a practice meant to protect orthodoxy and moral order. Several matrons and nuns, recognized for their expertise in this domain, proceed with the examination. They conclude that Jean is a virgin, which eliminates a frequent accusation against women suspected of malevolence. On a purely intellectual level, theologians are surprised. Jean, coming from a rural background, has little bookish learning. She has not studied in a university, is unaware of scholastic subtleties, and cannot read or write fluently. Yet, her responses during interrogations are surprisingly coherent and meet the expectations of a devout Christian. No blatant contradiction or discourse considered blasphemous is detected in her words. She shows a sincere fervor and humility that contrast with the image one might have of a young person seeking glory for herself. Above all, Jean presents herself as an instrument of divine will, not as a prophetess in conflict with the church. Her clear and repeated wish is to crown the legitimate Dauphin, repel the adversaries occupying France, and restore both order and justice. To trap questions attempting to make her say she receives her orders directly from God without considering the church, she responds with caution and insight. She states that she fully recognizes the ecclesiastical institution, but that her voices have entrusted her with a particular mission. This delicate balance gradually reassures the commission, which does not detect in Jean the desire to undermine the religious hierarchy. The political aspect of the examination should not be overlooked. Within the court of the Dauphin Charles, some advisors believe that if the church, through its theologians and prelates, does not label Jeanne as heretical, then the royal power can benefit from her growing popularity among the faithful. The rumor of this young shepherdess, inspired by God, begins to galvanize the people, tired of defeats and the climate of perpetual war. An official support from the local church is thus sought to legitimize the idea that Jean is not a danger, but a sign of providence, offering new hope for France. Many people in cities and the countryside see in her figure a near-miraculous presence, likely to revive patriotic momentum and overcome the disillusionment created by successive defeats and internal divisions. The ruling circles, while maintaining some pragmatism, are inclined to embrace this popular fervor, as long as there is no serious reason to condemn her for heresy or imposture. While she is in Poitiers, Jeanne mentions a place dear to her heart, the chapel of Sainte Catherine de Fierbois, located not far from Chinon, halfway between Tours and Poitiers. In the medieval mindset, sanctuaries, relics, and places of devotion are credited with powers of protection and healing. Jean claims that there is a sword hidden behind the altar in this sanctuary, marked with 5 crosses, which she wishes to retrieve in order to wield a blessed weapon in her upcoming battles. This statement is perceived by some as further confirmation of the divine guidance she is believed to receive. According to accounts, the sword is searched for, and it is indeed found, slightly rusty, but usable after cleaning. This episode, which might just be an anecdote, holds a major symbolic value for her supporters. Jean is thought to have received inspiration from Saint Michael, or her saints, to guide the search for the weapon and put it to the service of the legitimate cause. In the mentality of the time, such a sword is not merely a tool. It represents the celestial will packaged in a tangible form, an object marking the sacred struggle of good against evil. In April 1429, the French city of Orléans had been under siege for several months by English forces, reinforced by contingents from Burgundy and other allies. The blockade, which began at the end of 1428, nearly encircles the city and directly threatens what remains of the kingdom under the control of Dauphin Charles. Over the weeks, the attackers have built bastilles around the city to solidify their defensive lines and maintain tight control over passageways. The bridges and roads leading to Orléans are constantly monitored, and river access on the Loire is largely restricted by English naval maneuvers. On April 29, 1429, Jean arrives in view of the city, escorted by several captains and men-at-arms who manage to get through enemy lines via less monitored routes. Her reputation as the Maid, a divine messenger, precedes her. Rumors spread that she has promised to lift the siege. Her arrival arouses strong emotion among the inhabitants, exhausted by deprivations and repeated fighting. As she passes through the entrance gate, a clamor rises in the streets. Witnesses report that she is greeted with admiration, like a providence sent to overturn the situation. Within hours, the morale of the garrison and the people of Orléans experiences a surge that will deeply change the course of events. Confidence is revived as soon as Jean speaks to encourage the defenders. She stresses the importance of communal prayer and urges the men to stand firm against the English attacks. Every morning, she attends Mass and asks everyone to confess and to behave justly. This leadership style, fueled by her ardent faith, contrasts with the usual practices often centered on strict military discipline. She also sees to it that excesses are limited. Blasphemy, internal quarrels, and acts of looting are sternly curbed. For many, this approach attests to a quasi-supernatural dimension, as if Jean embodied the purity and determination needed to reverse the course of a seemingly inexorable siege. At the same time, Jean sends letters of summons to the English commanders. Written by clerics at her request, these missives highlight the divine will and call for surrender to avoid unnecessary massacre. In these letters, she presents herself as the instrument of a higher justice that seeks not vengeance, but the liberation of Orléans and the kingdom. She promises clemency to those who renounce fighting, mentioning God's mercy as proof that there is still time to avoid harsh punishment. This direct communication, unusual between enemies, enhances her aura as an inspired figure and even surprises some English, unaccustomed to receiving warnings tinged with religious fervor, even on the battlefield. To lead military operations within the besieged city, Joan works closely with Jean d'Orléans, better known as Dunois, or the Bastard of Orléans. An illegitimate son of Louis d'Orléans, Dunois has become one of the most experienced war leaders for the French party. His precise knowledge of the terrain and his communication networks facilitate the implementation of coordinated strategies. Joan, for her part, brings a keen sense of religious symbolism, convinced that victory depends as much on spiritual fervor as on tactics. This unprecedented alliance between a pragmatic noble captain and a young visionary arouses curiosity, but quickly proves effective in countering the English setup around Orléans. At the beginning of May, several skirmishes take place to weaken the enemy bastions and open breaches in the enemy's defenses. Joan stands out on the front lines, encouraging the troops not to yield. During an assault on one of the fortified positions, she is wounded on the shoulder by an arrow or crossbow bolt, according to some chronicles. Despite the pain, she refuses to retreat and returns almost immediately to the fight, galvanizing the anxious soldiers. Her return, when many thought she was out of the fight, has an immediate effect on morale. She is considered as being protected by a higher force, furthering the belief that the siege could be broken thanks to her intervention. In the context of a France torn apart by successive defeats, this resurgence of will echoes widely outside of Orléans itself. Travelers, merchants, and passing soldiers relay stories of her acts of bravery. Very quickly, the presence of an inspired maid in Orléans becomes a symbol of hope for the Dauphin's camp. Stories exalting Joan's bravery spread in the surrounding areas, often embellished with amplified details. Some narrate that she single-handedly pushed back several English squads. Others claim she is invulnerable. This emergence of genuine propaganda associated with her name supports the idea that the situation is changing. The rumor even extends into enemy garrisons, where unease gradually takes hold. Meanwhile, the defenders of Orléans marshal all their resources to maintain pressure. Under the direction of Dunois and with Joan's spiritual support, targeted skirmishes are launched against the most vulnerable bastions. The goal is to weaken the English line, already strained by the length of the siege. The Loire, although partially controlled by the enemy, sometimes serves to discreetly bring food and reinforcements inside the walls. The English, aware of this resurgence of activity, strengthen their positions. However, they face an unexpected phenomenon: the emergence of a superstitious fear of Joan, as if her presence bore a sacred sign difficult to counter by sheer martial force. On the night of May 7th, 1429, the city of Orléans finds itself still mired in a siege that has lasted for months. English troops encircle the fortifications, setting up fortified bastions to control access and prevent any supply deliveries. At the heart of the adversarial setup stand several strategic positions, including the Bastille of the Augustines and especially the Tourelles, a set of fortifications defending the head of the Loire Bridge. Joan of Arc, who came from Domrémy a few weeks earlier, has already participated in raids aimed at weakening this blockade. However, this May 7th promises to be decisive. A major blow must be struck to break the English pressure on the city and restore the free flow of food, military supplies, and travelers. At dawn, the French army, under the direction of several captains, including the Bastard of Orléans and Joan of Arc, decides to concentrate its efforts on the Bastille of the Augustins. The captains believed that taking this point would strengthen their positions before attacking the Tourelles, considered the key to the enemy's setup. For several days, preparations have been underway to develop siege engines and assemble a sufficient force for an assault. Joan, brandishing her standard, encourages the soldiers, urging them to remain confident. The artillery, rudimentary but effective if well positioned, prepares to bombard the English defenses. Inside Orléans, the exhausted population hopes for a swift resolution. When the assault begins, the French infantry advances cautiously, protected by skirmishers and covered by the intermittent barrage of artillery. The English, entrenched behind palisades, try to repel the attackers with arrows and crossbow bolts. Joan, wearing almost full-plate armor, moves along the front to encourage the men, reminding them that God supports their cause. Despite the ferocity of the exchanges, the Franco-Orléans coalition manages to break the first line of defense. The English troops retreat inside the Bastille, but a breach is quickly exploited. After hours of combat, the Bastille of the Augustins finally falls, offering the French army a crucial foothold for the final assault. The next morning, the main objective becomes Les Tourelles, this imposing fortification that controls access to the Bridge of Orléans. By this point, the English understand that the loss of Les Tourelles would mean the end of the blockade and the opening of the route to Sologne and the regions south of the Loire. Dunois organizes the different French units, distributing archers, crossbowmen, and men-at-arms for a massive assault. Joan stands once again at the forefront, her white banner visible on the battlefield. The artillery, positioned downstream, begins to bombard the walls to create an exploitable weakness. The English leaders, aware of the danger, reinforce the garrison with all the soldiers still available. The battle for Les Tourelles then unfolds with intensity. The French launch several assaults, first striking the outer barricades, then attacking the thick walls of the fortress. In the melee, Joan finds herself at the front line, urging her people not to give up. It is at this moment that she is struck by a projectile, probably a crossbow bolt, which wounds her shoulder. The rumor of her injury quickly spreads, causing concern among some soldiers. However, despite the pain, she briefly withdraws to receive care, then quickly returns to the fight. This remarkable scene galvanizes the fighters, convinced that divine support carries their effort and that they will win the victory. The English, bewildered by the enemy's audacity and Joan's tenacity, nonetheless try to maintain the advantage by keeping up a steady fire from the heights of Les Tourelles. They also make occasional sorties to repel the attackers. However, the French coordinate their actions better. The artillery continues to open breaches, while the infantry regroups to exploit every flaw. The surrounding bastilles fall one by one, depriving the English garrison of fallback positions. A sense of inevitability sets in among the opposing defenders, whose morale declines. The constant presence of Joan, despite her injury, reinforces the conviction that God stands with the French. Gradually, Les Tourelles appears threatened from all sides. After several attempts to break down the main gate, the French concentrate their efforts on the weak points of Les Tourelles. Ladders are raised against the curtains, sappers are sent to undermine the foundations, and Greek fire is used to sow confusion among the defenders. Joan, when not directly on the front line, prays softly, asking for heavenly help to support the offensive. The French captains, encouraged by the uninterrupted progress, order a new general assault. On their side, the English, seeing the imminent danger, try to barricade the breaches with planks and stakes. Despite their fierce resistance, the pressure becomes untenable. Slowly, the structure of Les Tourelles begins to give way. Finally, in the afternoon of May 8, 1429, a group of French soldiers reaches the top of the outer wall. Shouts resound, signaling that the invaders have gained a foothold on the ramparts. Confusion spreads among the English, who face determined enemies supported by the Orléans population. Several defenders attempt to retreat to the inner part of Les Tourelles, but the French, galvanized, push their advantage. The archers and men-at-arms take advantage of the breaches to penetrate inside. Street fighting multiplies in the corridors and small courtyards. Under this irresistible pressure, the English eventually break, some trying to flee over the bridge, others seeking to surrender. At the same time, on the other side of the Loire, French troops ensure that the bridge will offer no easy escape for the fugitives. The English, encircled and in disarray, must finally abandon the Tourelle. Capitulation begins in confusion. Now, the English shots that threatened Orléans from these fortresses suddenly cease, and the bells of the city ring out in full peal. This fall marks the long-awaited turning point. Not only is Orléans liberated, but the English will to maintain a stranglehold on the Loire is broken. The besiegers retreat north, unable to contain the French at this crucial point. The road to the south reopens, heralding the recovery of a kingdom in peril. Soon, river and land communications are re-established, allowing convoys of food and arms to move unhindered between Orléans and the Midi provinces. This brilliant victory serves as a political turning point for Joan, whose popularity grows with the Dauphin Charles. Rallies multiply in the surrounding towns, where the bravery of the Maid and the apparent effectiveness of her inspired directives are celebrated. For the kingdom's population, often plunged into distress from recent disasters, it is a true sign of renewal that is emerging. In the eyes of many, Joan's mission is finally taking concrete shape. After so many setbacks, France realizes it can defeat a formidable enemy. Hope is reborn, and confidence in the royal project is rekindled. In the days that follow, the echo of this deliverance spreads, suggesting that a new era is opening for all. In June 1429, in a kingdom of France still shaken by the 100 Years' War, troops loyal to the Dauphin, Charles embark on a daring series of military operations to secure recent victories achieved thanks to Joan of Arc. After the lifting of the siege of Orléans in May 1429, French determination is redoubled. Officers and common soldiers, emboldened by the supposed intervention of Providence, consider it time to exploit the element of surprise to prevent the English from recovering. Attention then turns to the Loire Valley, a crucial strategic axis for traveling to the heart of the country. Conquering or liberating the towns along this river will offer Charles a vital corridor to the northern regions. At the time, river routes constitute essential commercial and military arteries, ensuring the rapid transport of troops and material. The English know this and firmly hold certain strongholds, hoping to block the French advance. However, the recent liberation of Orléans has instilled new hope in the Dauphin's camp. If their army can dislodge the English garrisons from Jargeau, Meung, and Beaugency, then defeat their reputedly invincible archers at Patay, the road to Rouen, the traditional coronation site, will soon be open to them. The first stage of this offensive campaign takes place at Jargeau, a fortified town located about 20 kilometers east of Orléans. After their defensive victory, the French wished to consolidate their positions on the Loire and prevent any large-scale enemy incursion. At the head of determined contingents, Joan of Arc, the Duke of Alençon, and Jean de Dunois, known as the Bastard of Orléans, approached the ramparts. The English, led by the Earl of Suffolk, prepared to withstand a siege, aware of the strategic value of the place. On June 12, 1429, after some exchanges of artillery, the French launched the assault. Thanks to the precision of nascent bombards and the fervor of their fighters, they create a fatal breach. The ensuing street fights remain intense. The English infantry retreats into the alleys, trying to set up ephemeral barricades, while the French gradually force the main gate. The cries, the clash of weapons, and sporadic gunfire turn the city into a confused battleground. However, English morale quickly falters as the French artillery has already caused considerable damage to the walls. Suffolk, wounded, must consider surrender to avoid a massacre. After some negotiations, the victors seize the city and get hold of several pieces of English artillery, a valuable gain that will serve in subsequent stages. Jargeau thus falls under the control of the Dauphin, confirming the momentum initiated at Orléans. As soon as Jargeau is secured, the French army moves towards Meung-sur-Loire, located about 20 kilometers downstream. This locality, equipped with a crucial bridge, controls a key passage on the Loire. For Joan and the captains, capturing this bridge means ensuring uninterrupted traffic to the more western regions, which would facilitate the arrival of reinforcements. The operation begins in mid-June 1429. The English present in Meung, fewer in number than those in Jargeau, rely on the strength of the towers and the presence of cannons placed on the ramparts. Yet the French bombardment, coordinated by experienced master gunners, quickly opens breaches. The defenders are forced to retreat, and shortly afterward, the entire town returns to Dauphinois control. This new capture further boosts the French morale and ensures free movement on this river axis. The captured resources include provisions, artillery pieces, and various siege materials, essential for the continuation of the campaign. The inhabitants, long subjected to foreign garrisons, often welcome Joan and her companions as liberators, although acts of violence may occasionally erupt among the men-at-arms. Overall, the leaders attempt to contain the exactions to maintain the image of a regenerated army. Moreover, the echo of these victories spreads to neighboring regions. Castles and towns, still uncertain, begin to perceive the growing influence of the Dauphin, fearing they might face the French might. Bolstered by this momentum, the Dauphinois army then advances on Beaugency, positioned midway between Orléans and Blois. In this town, the English still hope to gather reinforcements and organize a more solid resistance, relying on the favor of their renowned archers. However, the succession of recent defeats heavily weighs on the morale of these troops. When the first French contingents appear, they quickly deploy their artillery to threaten the ramparts. Instead of getting caught in a long siege, the English prefer to enter into negotiations, aware that the arrival of additional troops is delayed. After some discussions, Beaugency surrenders without too much damage. This swift surrender spares lives and prevents the French from exhausting themselves in prolonged assaults. On June 18, 1429, the last major act of this campaign takes place, the Battle of Patay. The English had gathered in the vicinity, hoping to use their master weapon, the longbow, to replicate past successes like at Crécy or Agincourt. To counter this threat, the French strategists decide to take the initiative of a rapid attack before the archers can set up their defensive stakes. Locating the enemy position becomes a high priority, and scouts dispatch patrols. As soon as a weakness is detected, the French cavalry, backed by the infantry, launches an assault. It is a brutal shock. Caught unprepared, the English archers do not have time to unleash their formidable firepower. In the melee, the English attempt to reform their lines, but disorder quickly ensues. Sir John Fastolfe and John Talbot, seasoned officers, struggle to impose their usual discipline. The French cavalry, led by leaders like La Hire and Florent d'Illiers, exploits the element of surprise to the fullest. The archers, deprived of their stake walls, suffer heavy losses, culminating in a true disaster for the English army. Talbot is captured, while other officers manage to flee. This swift victory, often compared to the reverse of Agincourt, sweeps away the notion of the invincibility of the English archers. For the French chivalry, it is a long-awaited revenge. It proves that well-executed attacks can penetrate the enemy's wall of arrows. In July 1429, the Kingdom of France is going through a crucial period. After the liberation of Orléans, Charles, nicknamed the King of Bourges by his adversaries, decides to lead his army towards the city of Reims. Reims is traditionally the place of coronation, and bringing Charles there means validating his authority before the church. However, before setting foot on Reims soil, he must first pass through towns under Burgundian influence or allied with the English, the first key stage being Troyes. The localities hesitate to open their gates, fearing reprisals should Charles's campaign fail. However, the presence of Joan of Arc, crowned with success since Orléans, inspires hope among the inhabitants and the combatants loyal to the Dauphin. The first notable city on this journey is Troyes, an important town in Champagne. Troyes had already witnessed the Treaty of 1420, which recognized an English claim to the crown. The notables fear taking sides with Charles VII in case the English regain ground. However, the peaceful advance of the royal army, carried by the renown of Joan of Arc, increases the pressure on the local authorities. Rather than risk a destructive siege, Troyes ends up yielding, allowing Charles and Joan to progress without major bloodshed. The arrival before Reims stirs particular emotion. For centuries, the Cathedral of Notre-Dame de Reims has been considered the cornerstone of French monarchical power. The imposing Gothic architecture, with its soaring towers and colorful stained glass, symbolizes the divine legitimacy conferred upon the sovereign. For Charles VII, entering this city without needing any battle constitutes a moral triumph. The aldermen and dignitaries, aware of the historical significance of the consecration, seek to avoid a full-fledged siege that could severely damage the city. After some cautious negotiations, Reims finally opens its doors to the royal army. The population welcomes Charles and Joan with a certain curiosity tinged with relief, realizing that the heavy crises burdening the country might find a more optimistic resolution. On July 17, 1429, the Reims Cathedral becomes the stage for a ceremony in the purest continuity of French monarchical tradition. The clergy, dressed in their liturgical garments, led Charles VII inside the edifice, while Joan of Arc, clad in light armor, holds her white banner not far from him. In the eyes of contemporaries, this banner represents a tangible sign of divine intervention in favor of the kingdom. The rite of consecration follows a precise order. The bishop proceeds to anoint the king with the holy oils, then presents him with the regalia, including the crown and the sword. Although the war is far from over, this sacred moment crystallizes a new hope for the Valois dynasty. The symbolic approval of the church grants Charles VII the halo of legitimacy. During August 1429, the city of Paris represents a crucial strategic stake in the war between the Kingdom of France, led by Dauphin Charles, the future Charles VII, and the English and Burgundian forces. For several years, the capital has been significantly influenced by the Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, whose shifting alliances have sometimes served English interests. For many Parisians, allegiance to the Burgundian faction is explained by the need for protection and stability in a context where the Franco-English conflict rages. The inhabitants have already experienced food shortages, requisitions, and a permanent atmosphere of insecurity. All this reinforces the importance of the English garrison, solidly entrenched behind imposing walls. Paris's ramparts have been consolidated over the years with deep moats and advanced defensive works designed to deter any frontal assault. It is within this tense framework that Joan of Arc addresses the question of recognition of the king in the eyes of his subjects and the capture of the symbolic city. Since the lifting of the siege of Orléans the previous spring, Joan's notoriety has continued to grow. However, within the Dauphin's court, some advisors remain skeptical about how to handle Paris. the stakes are manifold. Continuing the military reconquest could strengthen Charles's legitimacy, but an assault on the capital, if it resists, could harm the victorious momentum. The king, influenced by more cautious voices and diplomatic negotiations with the Duke of Burgundy, hesitates to lead a frontal attack. Joan of Arc, on her part, is determined to capture Paris to consolidate the monarch's position and provide a unifying momentum. The divergences are clear. The Maid advocates boldness and trust in Providence, while the royal advisors weigh the fragile balance of treaties and the French army's capacity to withstand a prolonged siege. On September 8, 1429, Joan of Arc stood on the outskirts of the capital with part of the royal army. The French troops, galvanized by their previous successes along the Loire, hoped to take the defenders of Paris by surprise. However, the city was solidly prepared. In addition to the English garrisons, the Burgundian faction provided seasoned contingents, experienced in the defense of strongholds. As they approached the gates, English shooters unleashed a heavy fire of crossbows and rudimentary arquebuses, joined by volleys of long arrows. The moats, wide and filled with water, complicated the attackers' progress, while the walls were high enough to prevent any quick climbing. Despite this hostile environment, Joan displayed fierce determination. During the assault, she moved to the front line, encouraging the soldiers to advance, until the moment when a crossbow bolt struck her in the thigh. This injury did not prevent her from wanting to continue the effort, yet the timing of the assault did not receive the full approval of the king and his advisors. Seeing the Paris defenses more resistant than anticipated and fearing entanglement, Charles ordered a general retreat to preserve the integrity of his host. The French withdrew in good order, avoiding a bloody setback, but the decision created a sense of deep frustration in Joan. For the Maid, withdrawing from the fight was akin to wasting the momentum gained since Orléans and Patay. She felt that this first setback before Paris might erode the troops' morale and revive some doubts among Charles's supporters. Moreover, the prospect of negotiations with the Duke of Burgundy fueled Joan's mistrust, fearing that they would delay instead of seizing the opportunity to strike at the enemy's heart. Following this partial failure, Joan went to Saint-Denis, a place of great spiritual and dynastic importance for the French monarchy. The Abbey of Saint-Denis, founded as early as the Merovingian era, houses the royal necropolis where many kings and queens of France rest. For Joan, it was a sanctuary full of symbols, a permanent reminder of the dynasty's history and the kingdom's sacred vocation. It is there, according to several accounts, that she deposited some pieces of armor as an offering, a gesture that demonstrated both her deep faith and her desire to dedicate her arms to Charles's cause. The choice of Saint-Denis, so close to Paris, also underscored Joan's determination to inscribe her actions in the tradition of the very Christian kings. However, this pious act did not erase the bitterness felt after abandoning the assault, nor the physical wound from which she was slowly recovering. Meanwhile, on the English and Burgundian side, propaganda was activated to take advantage of this defensive success. For several months, Joan's reputation had been built on a continuous series of victories, and the failure before Paris came to break this momentum. The Maid's opponents seized the opportunity to claim that Joan was not the divine envoy she was depicted to be, but rather an ordinary woman whose exploits were more due to luck than divine intervention. Rumors then circulated, suggesting the possibility of a declining protection from her voices, or hinting that God did not support the French cause as much as she claimed. These stories spread quickly in the streets of Paris and to foreign courts, undermining the confidence that many soldiers and supporters had placed in her. At the Dauphin's court, some advisors saw it as confirmation of their own doubts. The prospect of a winter campaign, rarely undertaken due to difficult weather conditions, was discussed to maintain pressure on the English and Burgundian troops. However, the logistical obstacles were considerable. Medieval armies heavily depended on local harvests and fiscal revenues to feed and equip themselves. Coming out of a series of costly battles, the royal treasury was depleted. The soldiers, often from irregular companies, demanded guaranteed pay, without which they risked deserting or turning to brigandage. The roads were poorly maintained, transporting artillery pieces proved laborious, and the supply of powder remained precarious. In this context, returning to a quick offensive required significant resources and unified political support. Yet the court was divided between those who wanted to attempt another bold move before winter, and those who, more pragmatic, advocated for negotiation. In this uncertain autumn, Jean remains convinced that offense is the best strategy. Yet she clashes with the growing hesitancy of the court, where there are fears of depleting financial reserves too much and of offending the Duke of Burgundy, a potential ally for tomorrow. Brief skirmishes take place around Saint-Denis, without decisive results. The French army, scattered, partially withdraws to the Loire Valley to find safer winter quarters. As for Jeanne, wounded and frustrated by the procrastination, she begins to perceive that her influence is not unanimous, and yet her supporters, despite everything, keep hope alive for a resumption of initiative the following spring, when the climate and political will allow it. In the heart of a winter already heavy with challenges for the Kingdom of France, Jeanne d'Arc embarks on a new campaign, less spectacular than the lifting of the siege of Orléans, but just as revealing of the military and financial difficulties faced by the Dauphin Charles, who became King Charles VII after his coronation in Reims in July 1429. The objective is to capture the town of La Charité-sur-Loire, located on the banks of the Loire, in a traditionally disputed region. For several months, the French army, seasoned by the successes of the summer, tries to consolidate its territory and definitively drive the English and their Burgundian allies from key positions along the river. However, the effort required to continue this reconquest begins to weigh heavily on the finances and morale of the soldiers. The initial preparations, hastily conducted, quickly show that the siege of La Charité-sur-Loire will be far from an easy task. The winter weather conditions at the end of 1429 constitute a primary obstacle. The cold and damp persist, making maneuvers arduous, while logistics suffer from a lack of coordination. Moreover, artillery reserves remain insufficient. Lacking enough heavy pieces, the royal army cannot effectively bombard the defenses of La Charité. At this time, the use of artillery is certainly booming, but it requires expertise and resources that the French do not possess abundantly. Cannons, culverins, and bombards are expensive to produce, long to transport, and complex to handle. Despite the support of some artillery craftsmen recruited from recently reconquered towns, supplies remain precarious. The foundries capable of producing or restoring siege pieces are scattered, and the cannons acquired during previous campaigns need repair after months of intensive use. Faced with this technological deficit, Jeanne and the captains around her count on reinforcements promised by various allied localities. However, the arrival of these fresh troops and their equipment is awaited. Local lords, exhausted by multiple requisitions, sometimes hesitate to send their men on prolonged campaigns. They fear leaving their castles and towns defenseless against enemy raids or even mere bands of marauders. The new recruits also take longer to mobilize, as the zeal that had animated the fighters after the summer victories fades. Many wonder why continue these difficult sieges when the king is already crowned at Reims. In a context where public opinion remains heterogeneous, enthusiasm is no longer as unanimous as it was in the spring. The issue of arrears in pay further stirs strong discontent. To make up the artillery shortfall and maintain the initiative, the Crown requests local collections. The aim is to raise additional funds in the surrounding countryside, as well as in the towns, to produce or acquire the necessary equipment for the royal army. However, this demand for war funding weighs on the populations, already strained by grain requisitions, troop housing, and the latent fear of the enemy resurfacing. The bailiffs and royal receivers, tasked with collecting the money, struggle to meet spontaneous cooperation from communities, which cite their growing precariousness. Since the end of the 14th century, the 100 Years' War has regularly emptied the coffers of the king's subjects, not to mention the demographic and economic impact of the plague on villages. Furthermore, several royal advisors suspect some agents of embezzling part of the funds or neglecting to submit financial reports, increasing the confusion. Sure, here's the translation following your instructions. Granting artillery to the expedition against La Charité-sur-Loire thus becomes a true headache. Reinforcements are delayed, the coffers are empty, and the military coordination is not up to the urgent needs. Jean, eager to get to grips to consolidate the royal presence on the Loire, faces the harsh reality of winter campaigns. The enemy, entrenched behind solid fortifications, waits for the French offensive to wear itself out. As winter progresses, fatigue grips the French ranks. Soldiers fall ill or shiver in the muddy bivouacs around La Charité, while captains discuss hotly the best tactics to adopt. Should they attempt a frontal assault without substantial artillery? Should they wait until spring? Supplies are dwindling, and the presence of a few hostile companies in the region limits resupply possibilities. Under pressure from time and weather, the first skirmishes around the town yield nothing decisive. Jean's troops, weakened, fail to break the defenses. The walls of La Charité attest to a fierce will to hold out at all costs. The defended city knows that the cold season works in its favor, as the French army is far from its main bases and lacks the means for a prolonged siege. As the weeks pass, the situation deteriorates for the attackers. The exchanges of arquebus fire, the sporadic shots from the few available cannons, and the attempts to undermine the walls stall. Jean's military advisors fear that a combined and massive attack cannot occur without risking heavy losses. Moreover, the arrival of promised reinforcements remains uncertain, and the slightest rumor of approaching Burgundian or English detachments undermines French morale. Despite the charisma of the Maid, fatigue gradually turns into doubt. Subordinate officers wonder, continue a costly siege in lives and money, or break camp to preserve the rest of the army? This constant hesitation paves the way for failure. The diplomatic and financial delays, combined with the hostility of winter, result in the gradual withdrawal of troops stationed around La Charité. The final assault, which Jean hoped to lead with determination, will not take place under the intended conditions. The siege ends in a withdrawal. A state of general exhaustion is acknowledged, and at the beginning of the year 1430, the royal army decides to retreat. The icy winds, frost, lack of powder reserves and projectiles, as well as a logistical support that does not arrive, hasten the end of this operation. Precious time is also lost, negotiating the acquisition of new funds to replace damaged artillery pieces without sufficient success. Instead of a clear victory, fatigue and disappointment prevail. The low morale quickly reverberates at the court, where the defeat, even partial, raises criticisms. Many advisors, already convinced that it was necessary to capitalize earlier on the successes of the Loire campaign, express frustration at what they see as an excessive obstinacy in wanting to take La Charité in the heart of winter. They accuse some of Jeanne's supporters of constantly overestimating the moral influence of the holy warrior and underestimating the necessary logistics. Others complain that the Maid's energy, so precious in the spring and summer of 1429, has been dispersed in ill-prepared ventures. Rivalries simmer, pitting those advocating for a policy of consolidation and negotiations with neighboring powers against those wishing to pursue the war aggressively to strengthen the new coronation. In this climate, Jeanne d'Arc's position subtly evolves. Though she is surrounded by her past triumphs, the political reality changes after the coronation ceremony at Reims. Now, Charles VII, keen on expanding his authority bases, must appease the great lords, negotiate with dukes and princes, reassure the bourgeois of major cities, and deal with a nobility that remains attached to its privileges. It is in this complex atmosphere that the decision comes at the end of 1429 to ennoble Jeanne and her family. The king thus grants the one he sometimes calls his Good Lorraine an official status more in line with her role as a war leader. However, Jeanne's nobility is not synonymous with genuine political power. It is mainly a formal recognition of services rendered and a way to integrate her, symbolically at least, into the established order. For many of the king's close associates, this ennoblement, while granting Jeanne a title and coat of arms, remains limited in its tangible effects. She lacks the administrative experience and vast clientele of vassals that characterize other great lords of the kingdom. Her authority, charismatic and military, does not translate into a well-institutionalized network. Similarly, her influence on overall decisions, notably the allocation of resources for future campaigns, remains constrained by the rivalries stirring at the court. Those who support her rejoice in this royal gesture, seeing it as the consecration of a popular heroine. Others, more skeptical, believe that ennobling a young peasant woman, moreover inspired by heavenly visions, is a symbol too strong, likely to offend the sensitivities of the traditional aristocracy. Moreover, the defeat of La Charité-sur-Loire proves to those who doubt her that her presence does not automatically guarantee victory. Some advisors then insist on adopting a strategy of caution, arguing that the enemy remains strong and it is better to negotiate, particularly with the powerful Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, to isolate the English and reduce their hold. This vision now aligns with the king's position, wishing to consolidate his alliances. Reducing the Anglo-Burgundian alliance by opening talks with Burgundy appears as a more effective means of relieving the pressure on his territories. Diplomatic rapprochements with the Burgundians could ultimately loosen the stranglehold around Paris and strongholds still in enemy hands. In this context, Jeanne's offensive zeal, so valuable on the battlefield, becomes a political handicap for some when the prospect of an agreement looms. Jeanne d'Arc's initiative in May 1430 demonstrates her determination to quickly intervene where the situation becomes critical. Compiègne, a fortified city north of Paris and a key position for defending the royal domain, finds itself under the growing threat of the Burgundians, usual allies of England in the conflict ravaging France for several decades. This Burgundian coalition, motivated by territorial ambitions and a desire to maintain advantageous alliances, places considerable pressure on the rebels loyal to King Charles VII. Aware that the defense of Compiègne is vital to contain the enemy's expansion, Jeanne decides to join the troops stationed in the city. She hopes to thus bolster the morale of the local garrison and encourage the population to resist this new siege. Upon her arrival, she observes the scale of the Burgundian preparations, advanced posts, regular patrols, and the gradual infiltration of surrounding territories, which makes any counterattack complex to carry out. Yet, despite the difficult situation, Jeanne firmly believes in the possibility of a bold response. When Jeanne arrives in Compiègne, she finds a city restless, agitated by the prospect of an imminent attack. The ditches are being reinforced, the walls receive emergency repairs, and the anxious inhabitants participate as best they can in the defense effort. The city is strategically located on the banks of the Oise, which gives it a fluvial advantage for supply or to bring reinforcements. However, this asset can also turn against it if the enemy blocks navigation or sets up artillery positions on nearby heights. The military leaders on site welcome Jeanne with a mix of relief and caution. Her aura of victory, acquired after Orléans and Patay, stimulates the soldiers, but the memory of past defeats and the strength of the Burgundian faction continue to weigh on their minds. Messengers circulate between Compiègne and King Charles VII, who remained in the Loire Valley, to plan a possible larger-scale intervention. However, delays in response and political hesitations at the top complicate any rapid organization. On May 23, 1430, an expedition is decided upon to surprise the besiegers and attempt to break the tightening grip on Compiègne. Several captains, taking counsel with Joan, believe that a targeted offensive on the Burgundian camp can temporarily disorganize the enemy and bring back some prisoners to obtain strategic intelligence. On the night before, preparations are made in complete secrecy, ensuring the horses are ready, weapons are sharpened, and everyone knows the retreat route. At dawn, Joan leads the fighters out of the walls, determined to achieve a quick victory. However, the Burgundian resistance, better informed than anticipated, reacts firmly. The skirmish transforms into a more intense battle than expected, especially when the rearguard begins to experience heavy pressure. To avoid being trapped, Joan and her companions decide to retreat toward the city's gate. It's at this critical moment that coordination breaks down. An order to close the gates is given too early, cutting Joan and a group of soldiers off from the protection of the walls. In the confusion, the decision to close the gates without waiting for all the French forces provokes a panic. Those who find themselves outside suddenly face the Burgundian counteroffensive, facilitated by the defenders' imprudence. Joan, aware of the danger, tries to rally her men to organize a last-minute resistance, but the superior number of opponents forces her to retreat once more. On horseback, she searches for another entry point, perhaps a postern or a breach in the wall, but time is running short. The Burgundians, led by their experienced captains, exploit the French disorganization to encircle the isolated fighters. It is then that the decisive moment occurs. Joan, unable to reach the safety of the city, is surrounded and forced to surrender to avoid a massacre. Her capture marks a major turning point as she falls into the hands of soldiers under the command of Jean de Luxembourg, a vassal lord of the Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good. From that moment on, the question of her value as a prisoner becomes crucial. The potential ransom, in the context of the 100 Years' War, indeed constitutes a common means of profit for captors of high value. Joan, haloed by her decisive role in the liberation of Orléans and the rise of Charles VII, represents a significant political issue. The Burgundians quickly understand that they can demand a high price for her possible return to the French or negotiate her transfer to the English, who have every interest in neutralizing her. Consequently, Jean de Luxembourg undertakes an initial detention on his lands, while specifying he does not want to make any hasty decisions. Negotiations begin almost immediately between the Burgundian court and English agents, eager to seize the famous prisoner to organize an exemplary trial. Attempts at liberation by some of Charles VII's loyalists, notably through negotiation or competing ransom offers, quickly run into the growing influence of England, determined to obtain Joan at any cost. Diplomatic obstacles multiply, delaying any peaceful solution. Over the weeks, Joan's situation deteriorates. Fearing a spectacular escape attempt, the Burgundians decide to transfer her regularly to different fortresses in order not to give her supporters the slightest chance to locate her and mount a rescue operation. These exhausting transfers and the conditions of captivity reinforce Joan's isolation, who can no longer communicate freely with her supporters. At each stage, surveillance is increased. Vigilant guards are imposed on her, forbidding any unauthorized contact. In official reports, her jailers complain about her determination to remain faithful to her mission and convictions, fearing that at the slightest relaxation, she would take the opportunity to escape. Yet, despite the moral exhaustion and the climate of suspicion, Joan remains a symbolic figure among the populations favorable to Charles VII. In the surrounding countryside, her name still circulates as that of the Maid called by God, and many still hope for her return to combat. But for the Burgundian power, she must remain unable to cause harm under pain of reigniting the flame of resistance. Finally, after lengthy negotiations, the Burgundians find it more opportune to hand over Joan of Arc to the English, who wish to try her for heresy and treason. The transaction, sometimes described as a sale, is concluded when the English agree to pay a substantial amount, estimated at 10,000 livres tournois. This sum, significant for the time, reflects the political and religious importance the English place on holding Joan. By handing her over to their allies, the Burgundians rid themselves of a burden while serving their own military and diplomatic interests. From that moment, Joan's fate shifts towards a trial conducted in Rouen, the main English stronghold in Normandy. The persistence of masculine clothing, which Joan continues to wear in her cell, sparks lively debates and quickly becomes an argument against her. Traditionally, ecclesiastical authorities view this attire as an affront to the natural order and female decency, but Joan justifies it for both practical and spiritual reasons. On one hand, men's clothing offers better protection against the risk of molestation in a prison environment that barely respects her identity as a woman. On the other hand, she sees it as a sign of her mission, a symbolic extension of her military and divine role. The potential judges, however, see it as a dangerous transgression, even proof of a demonic pact. The clothing issue, innocuous to some contemporaries, thus takes on an almost doctrinal value. The soldiers guarding her pay little attention to it, but the religious officials are outraged and see it as grounds for future condemnation. At Beaurevoir, the place chosen by her jailers to hold her for a time, Joan considers escaping several times. Although the surveillance is tight, her guards do not fully suspect the audacity she can display. In a desperate act, she ultimately resolves to jump from the top of a tower, hoping to flee and join the Dauphin's supporters. The fall is harsh. She injures herself severely, but survives with bruises that temporarily disable her. This episode illustrates her determination to escape her enemies at any cost and reflects the strength of her faith, which sometimes makes her favor immediate action over her safety. Despite her injuries, she does not give up and remains determined to pursue her mission. The guards, for their part, become even more vigilant, fearing new attempts. The event also fuels accusatory speeches, with some seeing it as proof of a supernatural agreement or thoughtless pride. As part of the inquisitorial procedure, preliminary interrogations are conducted to build a solid case against Joan. Clerics and notaries, sometimes assisted by theologians, meticulously record her answers to catch any contradiction or evidence of doctrinal deviance. The questions focus on the origin of her voices, her submission to the Church, and the validity of her proclaimed mission. They aim to make her admit that her revelations stem not from a miracle, but from a demonic trick. Investigators also wish to shed light on her life's course, her supposed religious ignorance, and her attendance at places considered dubious. Every written statement could potentially be used against her during the official trial. Joan, however, tirelessly maintains her story. She claims to be guided by God, the Virgin, or saints, and refuses to incriminate anyone else. Her steadfastness in her version causes both irritation and fear among her adversaries. Over the weeks, rumors multiply around Joan's figure, fueled by the English and Burgundian authorities seeking to discredit her. Pamphlets and sermons depict her as an impostor, manipulated by the devil, or as a witch, responsible for the deaths of many enemy soldiers. It is emphasized that she wears male clothing, invokes saints without the Church's approval, and claims to converse with celestial powers. Meanwhile, rumors spread that she had made a pact with occult forces to achieve her victories. All of this contributes to creating a climate of distrust, even outright hostility in public opinion. The supporters of Charles VII, on their part, attempt to defend her image, recalling her successes and moral integrity, but their voices struggle to resonate in an environment controlled by the adversary. This media frenzy sets the stage for the upcoming trial. In February 1431, in Rouen, the young Joan of Arc faces a trial whose significance far exceeds her own person. The local ecclesiastical authorities, supported by the English occupiers, aim to discredit the figure who, until then, symbolized the hope of the French reconquest. Within the city of Rouen, then under English control, a rigorous judicial mechanism is set up. The preliminary charges, gradually established, seek to portray Joan as a heretic, a false prophetess, and a rebel against the Church, ready to undermine religious unity. Bishop Pierre Cauchon, originally from Reims, but closely linked to the interests of the English king, presides over this procedure in his capacity as an ecclesiastical judge. His motivations, both political and spiritual, rely on the University of Paris, an influential institution, long favorable to collaboration with the English forces. Several doctors of theology are mobilized to examine Joan's statements. They are supposed to verify whether her visions and conduct fall within authentic faith, or if there are traces of magic, superstitions, or doctrinal errors. The charges brought against Joan contain several facets. She is reproached for claiming to communicate with celestial entities without validation from ecclesiastical authority. Her visions, deemed suspicious, could fall under diabolical illusion. Some believe her guilty of witchcraft, as she supposedly bore banners and employed formulas that confirm her contacts with the beyond. She is also accused of schism under the pretext that she rises against the established hierarchy. Her refusal to submit to the militant church, embodied by the judges present, provides a strong argument to accuse her of imposture. The persistent wearing of male clothing is among the major grievances. At that time, transgressing clothing norms could constitute a sign of insubmission towards the established order. The judges see this attire as further evidence that she defies the law of God and the decency expected of a young woman. For Joan, dressing this way answers security imperatives, especially when she was in combat or detained in the presence of male guards. Yet, this choice is used as proof of her will to place herself outside the traditional framework imposed by the Church. In her defense, Joan insists on her pious heart and her submission to God rather than to men. She presents herself as a humble servant of the Most High, having received a mission to rescue France. To prove her good faith, she repeats that she depends only on divine will and not earthly judges. The theologians present, however, demand that she submit to the militant church, meaning the official representatives of the clergy. They fear that by ignoring hierarchical authority, Joan compromises the cohesion of the Christian community and the stability of social order. This fear is encouraged by the political presence of the English, who wish at all costs to deprive Charles VII of the legitimacy he acquired thanks to Joan's victories. In their eyes, solemnly condemning the Maid would destabilize French support and weaken the symbolic impact of her triumph at Orléans. A verdict of heresy would cast doubt on the divine inspiration she claims. The allies of the English power hope thus to annul the reach of what she has accomplished, for if her visions are judged deceitful, the luster of Charles VII's coronation at Reims would be tarnished. The drafting of the minutes and the management of transcriptions are then of paramount importance. The notaries, under Bishop Cauchon's control, carefully record Joan's words. However, nothing prevents the judges from omitting certain statements or emphasizing others in order to create a biased framework. Potential witnesses, whether favorable or hostile to Joan, are meticulously selected and asked to orient their statements in a manner compatible with the accusation. Thus, the official documented narrative does not solely represent the reality of the debates, but also the intentions of the authorities in place. During these sessions, Jeanne demonstrates a sense of repartee that surprises her interlocutors. Despite her lack of extensive book learning, she often replies with striking phrases in a form of popular wisdom. When questioned about her visions, she insists on their strictly divine nature, claiming they emanate from St. Michael and revered saints like Catherine and Margaret. The judges attempt to trap her by raising theological contradictions, hoping to push her into admitting a doctrinal error. Yet, she simply asserts that she answers only to God and prefers to keep certain details silent. The shadow of torture regularly looms over the interrogations, as it is common in inquisitorial trials to resort to questioning to extract confessions. Records indicate that the judges explicitly threatened Jeanne with questioning in jail to verify the sincerity of her statements. However, the idea of employing physical violence also raises some hesitations, as torturing a woman who claims to be sent by God could arouse indignation. The authorities mainly hope to break her morally, to wear her down, and force her to contradict herself before the entire court. Meanwhile, Jeanne is kept in harsh detention conditions. In theory, a prisoner accused of religious offenses could be guarded by people of her sex to avoid scandals. In practice, however, she remains in the hands of English soldiers, constantly watched and chained. To protect herself from possible outrages, she keeps the habit of a man, which further fuels the charges against her. In her cell, she prays daily and never wavers in her certainty of being guided by God. They seek to isolate her, to push her to despair. Jeanne's conduct in her cell testifies to an uncommon moral strength. Despite the relentless pressure exerted by ecclesiastical authorities, she maintains a combative spirit and refuses to blame anyone else. When encouraged to denounce potential accomplices or confess to having made a pact with malevolent spirits, she merely reaffirms her devotion. She prays several times a day, invoking divine protection and the memory of the saints she claims to have heard. The fact that she does not lament and does not try to shift the guilt to her relatives baffles her accusers. Some try to make her yield by promising clemency if she permanently renounces her alleged errors. Others advocate harsher pressures to force her to follow the will of the tribunal. Yet, she does not name any real or imaginary accomplice, and she insists that she has never acted except by the order of God. Gradually, this stubborn refusal serves as a witness to her unwavering faith and reinforces her supporters' belief in her innocence and courage. On May 24, 1431, a solemn ceremony is organized in the cemetery of the Saint-Ouen Abbey in Rouen. In front of a platform set up and a crowd gathered to witness the public reading of the act of abjuration. Joan of Arc, not yet 19, is presented before the ecclesiastical judges. In this highly theatrical setting, a document written in Latin, a language she does not fully master, is placed before her eyes. According to the procedure of the time, the young woman is required to acknowledge her errors and subscribe to the will of the militant church, represented by the men judging her. Under the threat of being sent to the stake immediately, she is subject to considerable psychological pressure. The terms of the text are deliberately ambiguous to make any future retraction impossible. The judges thus hope to prove her apparent submission, make her renounce her male attire, and signify that she submits to religious authority. Unable to read the entire text herself, Jeanne relies on the reading done by the notaries or clerks present. The wording of the document includes accusations of witchcraft, spirit invocation, and usurpation of male functions. Like many legal texts from the period, it is fraught with complex expressions and obscure canonical references. For a modern international audience, it is essential to note that Latin served not only to communicate among the literate, but also to maintain a certain power over the illiterate accused. Jeanne, constrained by the fear of execution, officially agrees to renounce her male attire, to stop claiming she acts under God's direct order, and to submit to the Church's authority. This abjuration is made public because the English wish to turn the event into a tool of propaganda, believing that a public retraction would be more humiliating for the one dubbed the Maid of Orleans. Nonetheless, witnesses report that at the very moment of the ceremony, Jeanne hesitates and shows signs of resistance to this act being imposed on her. Several chroniclers mention her lost look when presented with a parchment too long and written in a language she does not understand. Others note that she asked for a shorter form, probably hoping to limit the scope of what she was made to sign. In the records, there is a note indicating that she was pressured by her judges and made to fear that if she refused, she would be immediately sent to the stake. The idea of death by fire, seen as the most terrible of trials in medieval mentality, would suffice to make a spirit already exhausted by months of imprisonment yield. Jeanne eventually manages to make a sort of cross or sign, and the ceremony concludes with the official announcement of her repentance. In the days following this forced abjuration, Jeanne finds herself once again locked up, watched by guards under English control. According to several sources from the time, she still wears male attire, either because her female clothes were removed or soiled, or because it is a means for her to protect herself from assaults. Indeed, being surrounded by soldiers and held in an unsafe prison exposes her to risk of violence. In her eyes, maintaining her male attire remains the only way to preserve a minimum of physical integrity. Available documents do not completely agree on how this return to male attire occurred, some mentioning deliberate provocation, others suggesting coercion. Either way, her judges see it as a breach of the abjuration and immediately label her as relapse, that is, a fall back into an already condemned fault. This notion of relapse has a major significance in medieval canon law. When someone accused of heresy abjures for the first time, then falls back into error, they are liable to the death penalty without further trial. Therefore, the judicial machinery in place, closely tied to English political interests, founds a new charge against Jeanne and accuses her of relapse heresy. As a result, she escapes simple imprisonment or ecclesiastical correction and must be delivered to the secular arm, in other words, sent to civil justice, which pronounces the death sentence. Bishop Pierre Cauchon, the main orchestrator of the trial, justifies this decision by arguing that the defendant voluntarily broke her commitments and proved her insubordination. In the tribunal's view, it is about putting Jeanne politically and symbolically out of action, while demonstrating the Church's power against any alleged divine inspiration not validated. As she is led to the stake, placed above a mass of wood in bundles erected under a pillory, Jeanne asks for a cross to be handed to her. According to several testimonies, she asks for the presence of a church representative, likely to hear her final confessions or receive a last sign of compassion. It is reported that she invokes Jesus and the saints, repeating prayers aloud. An English chaplain, moved by the scene, reportedly improvised a rudimentary crucifix by tying 2 sticks, which he hands to her to accompany her in this extreme moment. According to other sources, she wished to keep her gaze fixed on a larger crucifix held at a distance in order to die speaking directly to Christ. Whatever the versions, there is agreement on the profound spiritual charge of her last moments, marked by fervor and anguish. Soon, the fire reduced her body to nothingness, but the executioners meticulously scattered the ashes in the Seine to prevent any pilgrimages. Rumors arose about remains that remained intact, fostered by the supporters of Joan. In the immediate aftermath, the English believed they had achieved a definitive symbolic victory, thus strengthening their political propaganda. Following the execution of Joan of Arc in May 1431, the political situation began to slowly evolve in favor of King Charles VII, still contested by the English and their Burgundian allies. Since the siege of Rouen, the very place of Joan's official condemnation, English authority remained strong in Normandy. However, various factors, including reforms implemented by the French sovereign and the military fatigue of the opposing camp, were paving the way for a major shift. The gradual reconquest of the kingdom, initiated through targeted campaigns, would reinforce the royal power. Charles VII, often nicknamed the King of Bourges, during the darkest years, initiated a series of large-scale reforms starting in 1431. He endeavored to consolidate the royal administration, notably by strengthening the offices and imposing new taxes to ensure the financing of the army. Gradually, military victories followed one another. The Praguerie, a noble rebellion, revealed the monarch's determination to enforce his authority. Moreover, a judicious use of diplomatic negotiations drew closer some princes who had previously been hostile. In this more favorable climate, the memory of Joan of Arc remained very much alive. Her execution in Rouen had caused a profound unease, even among those who did not believe in all her visions. Companions in arms like Dunois, but also inhabitants of Orléans, began recounting, as early as the 1430s, the bravery and piety of the Maid. The population, still marked by the sufferings of the war, was receptive to these testimonies that highlighted the heroic dimension of her commitment. More and more, clerics favorable to Joan also began to express themselves. Some priests who had observed her during her time at Chinon or during the Poitiers examination spoke of her sincerity. Others, connected to the University of Paris, which had long remained under English influence, questioned the regularity of the trial. Little by little, the idea that Joan might have been judged unfairly took hold in people's minds. The king, for his part, noticed the growing popular interest in this sacrificed figure and understood the political advantage of a possible rehabilitation. Between 1450 and 1456, under the impetus of men close to power, a great trial to annul the condemnation was organized. Charles VII, now more firmly established on his throne, wanted to dispel any suspicion of illegitimacy linked to the Joan of Arc affair. His objective was to have it recognized that the Maid had been the victim of a biased judgment orchestrated by the English and not of a fully ecclesiastical decision. To this end, an investigative commission was set up, tasked with scrutinizing the minutes of the Rouen trial and hearing numerous witnesses. The hearings began with a detailed examination of the circumstances of Joan's captivity and how the ecclesiastical authorities conducted the debates. The investigators listened to personalities who had participated in the first trial, as well as people who had known her before her arrest. The testimonies seemed unanimous on several points: the violence of her detention, the lack of impartiality of Judge Pierre Cauchon, and the pressure exerted by the English occupier. Gradually, a damning picture emerged, undermining the very validity of the 1431 verdict. Through these investigations, the notion of political manipulation resurfaced. The use of the inquisitorial procedure for purely strategic purposes was called into question, discrediting a figure perceived as a major support for the Royalist Party. The trial records of the time noted that Joan, an illiterate young woman, had been interrogated in Latin. She was accused of multiple crimes, the theological subtleties of which she did not always understand. In this new investigation, the lack of respect for her right to defense was also emphasized, illustrated by the absence of competent lawyers to support her. Beyond the legal aspects, the trial for nullity is also based on the evolving military and political circumstances. The English, now retreating on the battlefield, can no longer impose their will with the same firmness as 20 years earlier. Charles VII, having strengthened the crown's finances through regular taxes, the taille and the gabelle, has new leeway for negotiation or diplomatic pressure. Moreover, several French bishops, once silent, are now ready to re-examine the status of Jeanne. In 1452, the Inquisitor Jean Bréhal plays a key role in searching for evidence of unfairness. He questions numerous witnesses who had seen Jeanne in Orléans, in Reims, or in Poitiers. Since the initial trial heavily relied on the accusation of witchcraft, Bréhal strives to assess the true nature of her voices and visions. Those questioned confirm the maid's deep Christian devotion and deny any magical practices. Through these testimonies, the entire satanic argument collapses, reinforcing the idea of a grave judicial error. Over the years, pressure builds for an ecclesiastical court decision. The judges must decide: either they consider the former verdict valid, or they recognize that the Rouen tribunal transgressed canonical rules. During solemn sessions, Charles VII's lawyers highlight the scandal caused by the execution of a young girl defending her legitimate king and insist on the absence of tangible evidence of any heresy. several bishops declare themselves in favor of annulment. Finally, in 1456, the ecclesiastical tribunal publishes its conclusions and proclaims the nullity of the 1431 trial. This annulment, often called rehabilitation, aims to restore the truth about Jeanne's journey by rejecting all accusations against her. The arguments retained notably emphasize the coercion she endured, the manifest error of the judges, and the absence of any trace of witchcraft. By this verdict, Jeanne is declared innocent, while Pierre Cauchon and his accomplices are held responsible for an abuse of power, serving political ambition. In the wake of this, Jeanne's family's honor is fully restored. Her brothers, already ennobled under the surname du Lys, see their status confirmed. Thanks to the rehabilitation, they are recognized as members of a lineage that faithfully served the crown. This recognition of nobility is not limited to a symbolic privilege. It presents a concrete interest for their descendants. Jeanne's memory is entirely elevated, and her name becomes synonymous with heroism and absolute loyalty to the legitimate sovereign. Jeanne d'Arc's integration into the Capicien Valois narrative then changes the perception of the 100 Years' War and the future of the Kingdom of France. In the eyes of Charles VII and his advisors, the former accused of heresy now embodies an instrument of national unity. Her religious and military uniqueness is exploited to galvanize the populations in a context where peace is not completely assured. Soon, local communities begin to honor her with processions, commemorative plaques, and prayers during specific festivals. In several towns, ex-votos are erected in her honor. The church, despite some reservations, gradually admits the beneficial impact of celebrations, reinforcing collective piety and monarchical recognition. These manifestations, blending popular fervor and royal promotion, lay the foundations of a genuine cult.